Hey everybody, I got a new arrival here at Coral Gardens, a new coral. We have an orange hammer coral that's going into the tank today. And I'm just going to go over how I prep my corals for going into display and some dipping procedures that I use. So here we have a new guest in the quarantine. It's been through a few weeks of quarantine now and is ready for its second dip and cleaning and cutting. Okay, so we have this orangish hammer, 5 heads, that's been in quarantine for quite some time here, so it's time to get it out of quarantine and get it into the main display. So there, I'll set the timer for 5 minutes. It's in its dip. And while we're dipping, I like to turkey baste the coral and make sure there's nothing on it. I'll do this several times throughout the dip and make sure that if there is something on it, maybe we'll see it come off. It looks pretty clean, but you never know. So we'll let that sit for 5 minutes and then we'll get it rinsed off. So while that's sitting there, I'll just go over a little bit how I quarantine my coral. I'm not saying this is the right way of doing it, I'm just saying this is the way I do it. So I have a little holding tank that I bring my coral into. I'm blessed that I have enough room to have a small tank that I can have separate from the main system. So I bring my coral into a little holding tank. I dip them before they go into that tank. I usually like to buy my coral local so I don't have like shipping issues, because if I was to have something shipped from anything over 2 or 3 hours, I'd probably not dip it right after I received it. I'd probably want to hold that somewhere else. Let it settle down before I dipped it. It just helps with the mortality rate. But anyways, most of my coral here are local, so I hold them for about 3 weeks, sometimes a little longer depending on the coral, in the coral quarantine tank. They've been dipped when they go in there. Sometimes I'll pull the plugs off of them right away, and sometimes I'll pull them off later. Today, this plug looked pretty clean. We are going to remove the plug and clean the bases of the hammer coral skeleton before we put this in the main display. So I'll show you that. We'll take this off and glue it onto some fresh media before we put it in the main display. Okay, so that's been about 5 minutes, so we'll pull this out. I usually don't go much more than 5 minutes. Gonna give this a good shake here. This is the second dip for this coral. So what I'm putting in now is just clean seawater. And that's just to get off the dip and any residual from the dip, any residual pests that might be on there. Looks pretty good so far. I do like to remove the plugs on all my corals. I'll take those off and try and clean the skeleton the best I can. I really just want the coral. I don't want all this other stuff to come in with it. This is where eggs and critters hide and things like that. So I like to remove as much of this as possible and just get pretty much a clean coral into my tank. I guess at this point I will get some, I'm gonna affix this. I've got a location in the main display, so I'm gonna get some epoxy and get that ready and we'll get it put into the main display. Okay, so I have the hammer coral here. It's finished being rinsed off in the fresh seawater. And we're going to put it on the grip and saw here and get it removed from this plug. Looks like I have two separate colonies here, really. So let's start with the first one. Yeah, and that's come off of there. And we've got the second one left here to cut. There we go. Here's a nice clean cut. And I'm left with that. And then this will be removed, put in the garbage. There's a tag here from where they grew it, I guess. Anyways, let's get this into a new plug. So what I do is I actually ordered these online. They're actually dental glasses, a cheap version of them anyways. And I use these to inspect the coral and give them a good scrape and a clean up. I think this is probably the most important step, even probably a bit more important than dipping them themselves. So I go over it real carefully with this, and I have some dental tools that I clean the corals with. This is one that I use quite regularly. A couple ends. It came in a little kit, and you just buy it. It's another dental tool actually. Worked pretty good for fragging and stuff. Alright, I've got my coral over here. It's now in two pieces because that's how they had it on the plug, I believe. It was two pieces to make it look like a mini colony. So I got my epoxy here. I haven't tried this stuff actually before. Aquascape construction epoxy. We'll give it a shot anyway. 2 equal parts. Oh, this just feels a lot easier to mix than some of the other ones I've been using lately. Yeah, I'm liking that. So I'm not going to put this coral on a plug actually. I'm going to create an epoxy base for it, and I'm going to glue that epoxy. I'm going to press it into the epoxy base, and then I'm going to glue that onto the rock. And in the future, if I have a problem, I can separate the rock from the epoxy base by prying it off. When you put it on with crazy glue, it usually pops off fairly easy if you get a pry on it. Yeah, and of course these kind of corals don't really encrust over the rocks, so it should work pretty good. I won't bore you with mixing all this. Alright, I got this stuff mixed up pretty good. It's a pretty uniform color. If I'd read the instruction, it probably told me to wear gloves because my hands are now purple. Anyhow, let's get this set in there. I read the instructions, I just stopped after the first sentence when it said mix 2 equal parts for 5 minutes. I really did have a lot of patience. I'll try and get this set in there. Turn it back into a little mini colony. I'm not a big fan how the color comes off this epoxy. Also gets pretty slimy. So there you go. I've got it set in the epoxy. I'm going to get this glued into the tank. I'm going to add a little bit of glue onto the bottom, crazy glue, before I stick it in, just to make sure it sets properly. Okay, I've got that hammer glued to the rock. Where is it? It is right there. That's the epoxy. It's sitting there. The cloudy stuff seems to come off. I went and read the instructions. It said that's non-toxic. That cloudy stuff that comes off is supposed to be normal, so we'll see about that. I just really don't like anything mixing with my water, but yeah. Well, as you can see, my hammer garden here is getting quite full. She's looking really nice actually. I'm pretty happy with it. I'm happy with the new hammer here in the middle. Looks like it's starting to settle in. And thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you in the next video. Happy reefing.